Well, driving up from Rockland this morning, I had the radio on. I think I was listening to Weekend Edition on NPR, and they were going to have a segment that was about Easter. Easter was coming up, and I thought, well, this should be interesting. And I'm listening, and they were talking about how as Easter is approaching, the store aisles are filling up with chocolate. Chocolate. And I'm thinking, Easter, chocolate. Chocolate has conquered Easter now. And of course, the story really didn't have anything to do with Easter. It was really about how we are possibly facing a chocolate shortage in the future because of all these diseases that the cocoa plants are suffering from. So we have that little bit of good news to listen to this morning. All you chocolate lovers, look out. But I thought it was interesting. So we found another way to commercialize what used to be a religious or spiritual or sacred holiday. And Easter does mean different things to different people. And one of the major themes that we see expressed at Easter time, as well as Christmas, traditionally is this idea of salvation. People might rightly wonder, just what exactly is it that we need to be saved from? Well, I'm going to give you the classic explanation this morning, which goes something like this. God created the universe and everything in it, including human beings. And at each step of the creative process, God would call everything good. But it turned out that human beings weren't all that good. We turned out to be ungrateful, disobedient, rotten, worthless sinners. Now, can you see a little bit of a problem right there? Because here's the thing. God is supposed to be omniscient, right? God is supposed to be all-knowing. So wouldn't God have seen that coming? And the other thing is, how could God be wrong? God called it good. It turned out to be bad. Call it good one day and later decide to destroy it all in a flood because it's bad. Well, anyway, those are issues for us to deal with on another day. But continuing with the classic explanation of salvation. So the sinfulness of humankind sparked the righteous wrath of God, who condemned all of us to eternal death and damnation. According to the classic explanation, we richly deserve all of that and much, much worse. It was so bad that nothing that we could ever do, nothing that humankind could ever do, was sufficient to make God change his mind about us. The only thing that would change things would be if a totally innocent person, free from sin, were to be tortured and killed in our place. That would soothe the wrath of God. And of course, for Christians, the totally innocent person free from sin who was tortured and killed in our place was Jesus, who, as it turned out, was actually the Son of God. So the idea is that because he died, we are now free from eternal death, torture, and damnation. But there's one little catch. You have to totally and completely believe the explanation that I just gave you. And if you happen to live in a part of the world that's never heard of Jesus or the explanation, too bad. Death and damnation for you, no excuses. You think I'm exaggerating? I'm not. That is a classic doctrine known as the doctrine of substitutionary atonement. There are variations on the theme, but the gist of it is basically the same. Someone came up with a succinct and graphic way of putting it that's so clear it could be posted on Facebook. And it's this one right here. Jesus is knocking at the door saying, "Let me in." The person on the other side of the door says, "Why?" Jesus says, "So I can save you." The person on the other side of the door says, "From what?" And Jesus says, "From what I'm going to do to you if you don't let me in." People come up with these ideas. And I don't know about you, but I've got a bit of a problem with that kind of theology. Lots of problems, actually. And the good news here is that there are much better ways to think about the relevance and the meaning of the life and the teachings of Jesus other than this pernicious idea of dying for our sins and salvation along those lines. First of all, I highly recommend that people read the Gospels for themselves rather than relying on authority figures to tell us what they say. What we find is that instead of condemnation and damnation, Jesus taught forgiveness and reconciliation. And he said it's an inside job. It's not something that has to be imposed from the outside. We are not depraved sinners. We are fallible human beings who make mistakes and poor choices. Jesus had this wonderfully compassionate and charitable view of human nature. And he not only preached forgiveness and reconciliation, he walked the talk, because he refused to condemn the woman caught in adultery. He used his last words to forgive his own executioners. There's this great passage from the Gospel of Matthew which really sums up what Jesus taught about forgiveness, and they get it in just 2 lines. It's this story where Peter comes to Jesus with a question about forgiveness. And he says, "Lord, how often should I forgive someone who sins against me? 7 times? No," Jesus replied, 70 times 7. Unfortunately, most of our Bibles don't include the rest of the story. I've done a little research, and I have it on good authority that this is what happened next. So after Jesus tells Peter 70 times 7, Peter goes off to the side. He starts counting on his fingers, writing in the sand, and he comes back and he says, I get it. I forgive 490 times, then I can get even. And Jesus does this. Okay, I'm making that last part up. But it really is perfectly consistent with other places in the Bible where we find Jesus doing exactly that same thing. People didn't get it, and he got a little bit frustrated with his followers because they didn't seem to catch on quickly enough. Or, if they caught on to it, they started making up excuses for why they couldn't follow through on it, because he's asking them to do some difficult things. Forgiveness is a difficult thing. 70 times 7 doesn't mean 490. It means that you can't put a limit on it. Unlimited forgiveness, unconditional love. That's what Jesus taught. So, here's a question. If that's the attitude that Jesus had about love and forgiveness, unconditional love, unlimited forgiveness, if that's his attitude, and if Jesus is equivalent to God, according to most traditional Christian groups, how did they ever come up with this idea of an unforgiving, condemning, wrathful God entity? Could this be an example of human beings creating God in their own image? Our ancient ancestors created a version of God that was simply an invisible, supernatural human being who retained some of the worst qualities that human beings observe in their own behavior. Things like anger, jealousy, vindictiveness, and so on. Jesus comes along. He says, you got it all wrong. He says, God is the most loving thing that you've never seen. And the reason you've never seen it is because you've been looking in all the wrong places. You've been looking outside, over there, up there. You've been led to believe that God is locked away in the Holy of Holies in the temple, where only the high priest can enter, and then only on one day a year. That was the old Jewish theology. The religious authorities in those days, they claimed that they had exclusive control over access to God. And people believed that. Imagine the power that that gave them. Total control over access to God. You want God? Got to go through us. Jesus wanted to invite people into a direct experience of God. No middleman, no high priest required. And that kind of teaching, the teachings of Jesus, that threatened the God monopoly of the temple. His teachings threatened the power structure, and we all know what happens to people who dare to do such things. The power structure will find a way to silence you. But once the message gets out, it's too late. You can't silence an idea. You can't silence an experience that people have when they realize that the divine is within and they have that experience. You can't undo it. There were enough followers who shared in Jesus' unique experience of God, and the power structure couldn't shut that down. They shut down Jesus, but his followers carried on, especially Paul. Paul is probably the number one reason why Christianity spread all over the world the way it did. He traveled constantly. And one of his trips went as far west as Athens, Greece, where he really had his work cut out for him, because the Greeks, they were lovers of philosophy. They had all of these different gods that we've heard about in Greek mythology, but for the ancient Greeks, the real god was reason and logic. So along comes Paul, and he wants to tell these reasonable and logical Greek philosophers about Jesus and his idea of God as being a direct human experience. And so the story comes from chapter 17 of Acts of the Apostles. Paul is giving a speech to the big-time philosophers, and this is what he says. He says, "The God who made the world and everything in it does not live in shrines made by human hands." Doesn't live in the temple. Doesn't live in shrines. Nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mortals life and breath and all things. From one ancestor he made all nations to inhabit the whole earth, and he allotted the times of their existence and the boundaries of the places where they would live, so that they would search for God, and perhaps grope for him, and find him, though indeed he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. It's a little gem, isn't it? Paul was quoting a Greek philosopher poet by the name of Epimenides. So these Greek philosophers would have really been understanding what he was saying. They would have had this common frame of reference. He was speaking their language. He was putting the message into terms that they would really be able to appreciate. And I would suggest that Paul isn't just talking to the Greek philosophers here. This is a message that should still speak to us. Paul is saying that it's part of our essential nature as human beings to search for God. And even though Paul may not have intended it quite this way, he's actually helping us all with the very important task of reforming our ideas and our concepts and our talk about God. When we talk about that in which we live, move, and have our being, we can easily substitute the word universe or reality, which can really help us to get in touch with the essence of our unity message, which from the very beginning tells us that God is not a being with a human personality. God is principle. Or as Emily Cady wrote in a little book called Lessons in Truth, all the way back in the 1890s, she said, God is the name we give to that unchangeable, inexorable principle at the source of all existence. That in which we live, move, and have our being. God is but a name. It's up to us to make it personal through our experience of life. Or as Michael Dowd likes to put it, what reality are we pointing at when we use the word God? What is our experience? That's what Jesus was getting at. That's what Paul was getting at. So I think the only thing that we really need to be saved from is the notion that we need someone or something to do it for us or give it to us. And yet, even today, people are still groping and searching and looking for God in all the wrong places, even in unity. Beware of anyone who claims that they have some kind of special power to give you enlightenment, or a special power to put you in touch with a hidden realm or a secret level of consciousness. Beware of anyone who says that there is a secret or hidden teaching, a hidden energy field, or any kind of stuff like that. Nothing is hidden, and there are no special powers. The one presence and power is within everyone. It is that in which we live, move, and have our being. That was one of the points that was made so beautifully this morning by the Daily Word, which Donna shared with us, about the power of entering into the silence. Charles Fillmore said, "The highest form of prayer we know is quietly entering the inner chamber within the soul, shutting the door to the external thoughts of daily life, and seeking conscious union with God." Nothing hidden, nothing special, nothing that anyone has to give us. We have to make it our life's work if we want to have a consistent and practical experience of that one presence and power of that in which we live, move, and have our being. If we want to have an experience of principle, we have to make it our life's work, and not just here on a Sunday, but every single day. That's what it takes. That's what it takes. So I'm going to leave you today with a wonderful quote from Eric Butterworth, who was such a powerful advocate for this idea that the power is within each of us. And this is a great verse to read before taking some of that all-important time alone in the silence, such an important daily practice. Here's what Eric says. Dwell for a while on the idea as the universe, as the allness that we call God, realizing that everything within it, from the vast galaxies to the subatomic particles, is created in and of the universe. You may wonder about the vastness of the universe and peer at it through a telescope. However, you are not on the outside looking in. You are on the inside looking out. You are the universe at the point where you are. I'll leave you with that for today, and hope you can join us next Sunday when we'll be picking up with a little more of the wonderful wisdom of Eric Butterworth on the topic of miracles. Thank you.